Thank you, and thank you for joining us today. Now, it is beyond dispute that I am black. I'm too modest to add the beautiful part, but it's tempting. It's tempting. It's also a fact that now some 2 years or more that I've held a position that carries in it at least a little, a monicum of power. So it's a good time, I think, to talk about what black power has meant to me. My blackness has been the dominant factor of life's experience, and it is, I think, the dominant fact of life of every black man in America, or perhaps the world. James Baldwin, with his usual brilliancy, described a condition in his famous essay, A Stranger in the Village, when he talked about his experience in a small Swiss village as the only black man there. For this village, even if it were comparable, more remote, and incredibly more primitive as the West onto which I have been so strangely grafted, these people cannot be, from the point of view of power, strangers anywhere in the world. They have made the modern world in effect, even if they do not know it. The most illiterate among them is related in a way that I am not. To Dante, to Shakespeare, to Michelangelo, to Da Vinci, to Rembrandt, to Racine. The Cathedral of Chartres says something to them which it cannot say to me, as indeed with the Empire State Building, should anyone here ever see it. Go back a few centuries and they are in their full glory. But I am in Africa, watching the conquerors arrive. Now, because of white man's rape of Africa, and because of the suffering of slavery, and because of the long and barbarous history of segregation and discrimination, black people are strangers in the American village, because white America and white Europeans have developed the ideology of racism to justify the sociological and historical experience that I have mentioned. I find that I am a stranger in this village, but from another point of view, because I am a man and because I've been reared on the words, though not the facts, of Christianity and democracy. I'm also an inhabitant and, in a strange sort of way, a citizen of the village. Much of the history of black America is dominated precisely by that contradiction. It has been told one thing: democracy, freedom. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But it has lived quite another: slavery, Ku Klux Klan, and white liberals so concerned with black people that they will tell them exactly what they ought to be, what they ought to want, and what they ought to become. Schools that don't teach, promises from the Supreme Court which turns to ashes, churches that fail to practice what they preach. And that is why we've been forced to fall back on our own resources. For you cannot be a stranger always. To be continuously strange is to pay a psychological price that no people can endure forever. When black America then turns to blackness, to what Africa had long time called negritude, it has no apologies to make. From the time that I was a little child and before ever hearing of the name Othello, or in that matter of fact, Shakespeare, I knew that I was black. And no wonder that I, grown a man, that I must turn to the words of Leopold Senghor, or black African poet from Senegal, or those of Langston Hughes, or Arna Bontemps, or Leroy Jones, or Gwendolyn Brooks. And from the time that I was a little child and before I ever heard of Beethoven or Bach, I knew that I was black. And no wonder then that I turned to Jimi Hendrix and Aretha Franklin. and that I recall some anger that Black America's symphony conductor, Dean Dixon, who had to go abroad to practice his art. For the time that I was a little child and before I heard of Paul Bunyan and George Washington, I knew I was black. And no wonder then, as a grown man, that I must turn to John Henry's and Jomo Kenyatta's and W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, perhaps the most tragic aspect of being black in the United States is the situation in the schools. More than 15 years ago, the Supreme Court issued its desegregation decision, and yet today, a report in New York Times just said, I think just yesterday, more children than ever, North and South, are in segregated schools in this country. And they face many teachers who are convinced that they are incapable of learning. And these schools are largely for still another generation of porters and domestics. And we hear a great deal of talk today, particularly in the South, about integration. But I would raise a question about integration this evening. That is, even if you could integrate black and white bodies, this does not solve the problem of integrating their minds. Curricula, as most of the nation's schools, are intellectual monuments to racism. Black youngsters learn about great achievements of Italian explorers, Greek philosophers, French revolutionaries, English kings, but their own heritage is either ignored or dismissed as barbaric. They are taught the great events of Western civilization, but they do not learn that African rulers were once equal in power and majesty to European kings. They do not learn that during Europeans' dark ages, that the great African empires provided the main advance of human knowledge. They do not learn about ancient Africans who evolved systems of self-government, invented methods of irrigation, and made progress in medicine. And both black and white students do not learn that black men came to America before the first Englishmen, that they were the first French and Spanish explorers, and that they fought with Prescott at Bunker Hill, that they were with Washington at Valley Forge and founded major American cities like Chicago. In short, black and white school children learn little or nothing of the considerable black contributions to the building of America. And I would suggest this evening that an education for black youngsters that include their own history and some indication of their own worth would help to eliminate their negative self-image and improve their academic achievements. It would also contribute to solving of the aspect of the urban crisis, which is rooted in massive and systematic psychic destruction of black people, inadequate health facilities, inferior education, chronic unemployment, substandard housing. There are among the general conditions which create dynamite in the ghettos. The poet Paul Laurence Dunbar summed it up well when he wrote, "A crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but moans, they come double." That's life. And yet when ghetto explodes with frustration and despair and hopelessness, the larger society becomes indignant and utters irrelevant cliches about maintaining the law and order. So my experience with the word black is that of all black people. Being black has made me a stranger. Being black has dominated my life. And I cannot, nor would I wish, to reject my blackness. And so I turn to what the white world has attempted to make into a handicap, precisely the opposite. And black America is fortunate that our history and our culture is more than rich enough so that we can find in blackness an advantage, a source of pride, and a way to end our estrangement. Thank you.